Hello and welcome to another edition of Be Lifted Up Radio, your guide to living an abundant life. The show where we have great conversation with great guests about the connection between faith, finance, or whatever our calling might be in life, and the product of that abundant life for ourselves and others. And that and others part is a big part of what we're going to be talking about today, because listen, when God blesses us, He doesn't bless us just for us. As I say all the time, He created us to be vessels, not containers, meaning whatever He gives to us, yes, it blesses us, but we're ultimately measured by the positive impact, the service that we provide to others. And we're talking about community development, community justice, and community leadership today with our guest, Shemekka Ebony, who's an activist, author, coach, entrepreneur. Listen, don't get caught up in titles, but we're going to be talking about the things that you could be doing to not only enjoy abundant life for yourself, but if you're only thinking of yourself, you're not really thinking with a godly mindset. It should be, Lord, bless me so that I can make a difference in the lives of others. Sometimes that's financial, sometimes that might be social, sometimes that might be educational. You'll know what the Holy Spirit is calling you to do. The point is, you need to be committed to making a difference for your community. So listen, this is Be Lifted Up Radio, your guide to living an abundant life. I'm your host, Alfred Edmond Jr. We're going to be hearing from Shemekka Ebony. It's going to be a great conversation. You will be lifted up. Stay tuned. What inspires positive change in our communities? Listen, this is Alfred Edmond Jr., your host for Be Lifted Up Radio, and that's the question we want to address. Again, God blesses us so that we can have a positive impact on others. It's our service to others that defines our love for God. It's our impact on the broader community, however we define that community. Obviously, it might be your immediate family, it might be your immediate neighborhood, but ultimately your impact can reverberate throughout the nation, throughout the world. That's what kingdom building really is all about. Today's guest is just a great person to have this conversation so that we can both look inward at ourselves and outward at our communities to think about what it means to make a difference. She's a leadership support facilitator. She's an activist. She's an author. She's a coach. She's an entrepreneur. You know how we do it on Be Lifted Up Radio. Listen, please welcome to the show, Shemekka Ebony.
Thank you so much for this opportunity to connect with you and your audience. I really appreciate it. So glad to be here today.
Well, I can't wait to have this conversation with you, Shemekka, for a lot of reasons. I mean, there's all the things that I talked about in introducing you, but I come from both a family background, especially as a person of faith, and a educational background, particularly when I was on college campus as an undergrad, where a big part of what I thought was important for me to do was try to make a difference for others. On my mother's side, it's a family, it's mostly nurses, and then there was military people, and it was the idea that as people of faith, it wasn't just about remembering scripture and being able to sing the songs and all that, but it was about, okay, now when you leave this place, how do you bless others? And I think when you talk about community development, justice, and leadership and those topics, you're just the perfect person to have that conversation. But before we dive in, share with us your journey. Who is Shemekka Ebony, and how did you come to be doing what you do? Where you're from? What made you decide that this was your path? This was your calling?
Thanks so much. What a great question. I will proudly lift up. I am a country girl out of North Carolina that God put on a pathway and challenged my testimony for me to grow in God pretty much very strongly from theory to practice, I like to say. And so being called to be a servant of God at a very young age, 16, for me, being able to grow in God in a way that helped me understand the calling that we have in service, as well as being the representation of God that people see here on earth. It was very transformational for me when I think about what servant leadership looks like from theory to practice. And God just really opened a lot of doors for me in my life to not only survive some hardships, but also thrive to not only bring myself out, but bring others out. Something that I believe firmly in and I stand behind is that when God opens doors, I'm there to take it off the hinges, because it really isn't about just me, but it is about the calling so that others can be redeemed and know the power of God and his miracle working power. And that has really informed my work, not only as an entrepreneur, but I'm a wife of 6 children, mother of 6, just really appreciating what it means to be fruitful, multiply, not only by children, but by being a nurturer to so many people that are hurting and lost and broken. So my calling has created an opportunity for me to be an entrepreneur, and that's really what's informed the work that I do, how I serve in community, and what I like to call the hedges and highways experience.
When did you kind of know? I ask this question a lot of the successful people I get to interview for both this show and in my day job, if you will, as an editor at Black Enterprise. Here's how I put it. You know, when I'm much older than you are, so I'm a baby boomer. When I was a kid, and certainly for every generation before me, when people thought about what they wanted to do and be when they quote unquote grew up, it was all things you could see. You could like, oh, I want to be a construction worker. I want to be a nurse. I want to be a doctor. I want to be a lawyer. I want to be a teacher. I want to be a police officer. You know, it was very much occupations. And I say the challenge for every generation after mine, certainly your generation and the leaders and the people you help develop, is that what we may be called to may not be something that's readily visible when we're young. Or that it may not exist at that job. There was no such thing as a digital content creator when I,
Right.
but those are legitimate pathways to not only service, but obviously careers, entrepreneurship, and business. So that's a loaded question to say. You weren't like 8 years old and saying, you know what I want to be? I want to be a leadership support facilitator. Talk to me about the way God showed you things you experienced that led you to say, no, this is my gift, this is my calling, this is the way I can serve. When it's not something you can say, you looked up at 8 years old and say, oh, Mr. Johnson is a leadership support facilitator. That's about
Right. Great question. And it really, what illuminates to me in reflecting on that journey was I came from a single parent household. My mother was working in a industry that called on her to be physical labor as a sewer in a manufacturing company that was in our small town. So that was the example I had, but that wasn't necessarily a career choice after college. But what it did inform me is what hard work looked like. And so when God called me into the hedges and highways, it was more so a challenge for me to really tap into what does that really look like? Because I knew I didn't necessarily want to be who volunteer. Well, I don't know. There are some that volunteer to be pastors. But for me, when I think about, my long-term life goal, it was to be in community and be the change in community. And so I found myself being positioned often in community leadership postures, whether it was as a community champion, serving as a representation or liaison with community organizations. I did rape prevention work for about 20 years, serving in community. That informed that pathway. And with the community engagement component, I saw this great opportunity with leadership development, and I was actually getting comfy in life. Everything was going what I thought was smooth. I was actually going to get my PhD in organizational leadership, and my life really took a shaking and a shifting when my mother was diagnosed with cancer. And I had to kind of step into place and be that primary caretaker and had to literally put my pursuing of my PhD on hold. And my barter and challenge with God is, God, I believed you called me to go into organizational leadership, not because I just wanted to have a degree, but you wanted me to have the currency to create the change using their language and their power dynamic to really be that kingdom shifter. And if I have to put this down, then my expectation is that there's nothing less that you'll have from me. And that promise rang true because thankfully my mother is still here, alive, a survivor of cancer, thriving. So to God be the glory for that.
God be the
But
glory.
the abundance and the exceeding that came after that meant that I had the opportunity to serve as a leadership coach to other PhD scholars that were in pursuit of their health equity degrees, creating a culture of health and well-being. And I was able to take my lived experience expertise and create a navigational pathway for them to find their leadership right then and not when they finish their degree.
You know, everything you said is just so right for this show. I'll say this. Obviously, it's a faith-driven show. It's a faith-based show. But you make a point that our audience, that our regular listeners already know. Very few of the guests we have on this show are pastors, or we have some, but then most of them are people who are making a living, have areas of expertise, areas of ministry that are outside of the church walls. And I want to dive into that a little more as we get ready for our next segment. But listen, everybody, we're here with Shemekka Ebony. You already, I hope you got your Bibles and your notepads out, because you've already taken us to school already, because this can help inform your decision about how you apply your faith to your career, your calling, whether it's the one you have now or the one you may be being called to, and you're kind of trying to pretend you don't hear. Listen, sit tight. We're here with Shemekka Ebony, Leadership Support Facilitator, entrepreneur, author, coach. I'm Alfred Edmond Jr., your host. We'll be right back with Be Lifted Up Radio, your guide to living an abundant life. Welcome back to Be Lifted Up Radio, your guide to living an abundant life. You guys that were here for the first segment, you know the signs when I start bouncing in my chair. That means I'm getting excited by my guest. And our guest today is Shemekka Ebony. Listen, Shemekka, what you were kind of setting up for this segment with this whole thing about, I'll frame it this way. What you do, okay, coach, leadership support facilitator, author, entrepreneur, community leader, community developer, all those things, all the things are examples of things you could do and do well, do with a lot of energy and compassion, but see it as a totally separate lane for your life as a person of faith. And many of us, either by choice or because they just don't know any better, aren't always blessed with the ability to say, no, what I do for a living, what I do as my vocation, what I do as my skill, talent, education, and training is not some kind of parallel line to being a person of faith in the world, but is part of my calling. Now, again, some of us are blessed. I was blessed in 1986. I'll tell you a little bit of my story. My degree's not in journalism. I didn't know I was going to end up in that way. My degree's actually in art. And without boring you with all the details, I ended up in my first magazine job with no journalism degree, even though God prepared me. It was in 1986, to give you an idea how old I am. And I was in a hotel room in Los Angeles, in a suite in the hotel, working on the special issue of this magazine that I worked for, Modern Black Men magazine, feeling like a total imposter. And I dropped to my knees in that hotel room suite. And I said, God, if you get me out of LA without embarrassing myself, without them figuring out I don't know what I'm doing, I will dedicate my career as a ministry, not just as the way I make my living. So in a very real, and the rest is history, all my time at Black Enterprise, et cetera. But my point is, while that was a scary moment that drove me to my knees that day, it also blessed me because I'm never confused about who I work for. I'm never confused about why I do what I do. I never have any confusion about my career choices and my job choices, because yes, I have an employer and it is a kind of secular pursuit, but it's tied to my sense of purpose and passion as a person of faith. So that was a long setup for I'm impressed, and I can see why the creator of our show asked you to be on, because it's possible for you to do everything that you do make a good living, be very well rewarded and respected, and not see that as having anything to do with you being a woman of faith. So talk to me about that aspect of how you approach your life and your work.
So when I would say when I kind of surrendered my yes, surrendered to the call of being in service. For me, being in service was local missions. It was being in the hedges and highways. When the scripture talks about forsake all and follow Christ, I thought that was like a clean out my closet moment, right? Sure,
Right.
I can donate some stuff. Sure, I can declutter. Yes, God. And no, the Lord was like, no, there's more that I'm asking of you. And not understanding, it was the zealousness of just, yes, God, whatever you say, because I trust you blindly. That, whether we call it naivete or the full essence of what mustard seed faith looks like, for me, it manifested and it put me on a journey that on the outside may look like my life was turned upside down. And let's fast track it really quickly. I'm in a second marriage. My first marriage, my ex-husband at that time had committed a crime unbeknownst to me, got himself incarcerated. I was left with two kids after I had thought I had done it the right way. Went to college, got married, started a family, and somehow my picket fence was like literally blown away in a hurricane. And not understanding what that meant for me, having to somehow forcibly at this point be forced into single parenthood with at that point, a partner that was incarcerated for committing a crime, being in ministry even at that time, knowing that even though God had allowed me to walk down this pathway that would be shameful or look very challenging from the outside, God protected me and kept me, even though walking through this was bigger than me. It wasn't about how I came out. It was more so how people can be inspired and motivated and healed through my continuing to keep walking. And that had me on a pathway with two young children, actually having to live in a church that was built in 1920. I write about this and While I'm Getting Naked, because I didn't realize that missions really meant that I was going to be labeled as homeless. I was going to have to be identified as someone that was homeless to even get access for help. And it really inspired. And While I'm Getting Naked, me talking about name those labels, those things that people made you carry, those things that people put on you that really wasn't for you. It was just something you were walking through and you kept carrying it thinking it was yours. And the whole time, God has given us this power to really break free and lay aside every way. And so it helped me to be a really good practitioner of the word and how I walked it out. And not only that, staying naked and not ashamed was a daily practice. And so walking through that, living in a church, experiencing what people on the outside will call homeless, I understood it as housing insecurity. I was covered, I was under the shelter, and it protected me and my children so much so that we didn't get caught up in the ways of the world. We didn't have TV, we didn't have luxuries, we didn't have, at that time, cell phones were just kind of becoming more of the fad of being able to have these social media platforms. So I was covered. I look back at that and it's like, ooh, I dodged a bullet not getting involved in all these things that kind of distract us and tear us down as far as how we see ourselves. And it kept me in a posture to really look to God. And I was in that church for what was supposed to be a weekend, ended up being 2.5 years. And I had to trust God along the way. I thought that I would be employed. My vision was I'm going to be just there for the weekend. I'm going to be the executive director of the nonprofit of the church. I had a house on the riverfront and I had this nice, beautiful thing. Yes, Lord, I'll be the CDC director and I will write grants on the river all day for you, Lord, like my comfort way. And God was like, there is more that I require of you. And
Wow.
with that extra push, it helped my sons at that time were 5 and 7. They wrote grants to operate a backpack program to help young kids that didn't have food over the weekends or over summer breaks. They did like dance drives. I utilized their gifts, the things that they found connection and passion to. And as unto the Lord, we allowed it to be the thing that would draw men unto God. in creating an opportunity to serve. And so when I look back at it, hindsight, it was like the journey to get here wasn't something that had its own blueprint. And I'm pretty sure if I knew the blueprint, I probably would have was like, God, you must mean something else.
Oh,
But
amen.
the end result is it feels good to know that yes, it may feel rough. Yes, it may be challenging. Maybe you are the forerunner in what you're called to do, but you got to be inspired to keep walking. Simon was minding his business on the way to the store when he was called to carry the cross of Jesus. And many of us are minding our own business, doing our thing when God calls us to carry something that is bigger than us. So just like I share in the book, just like I share with my people, my scholars, keep walking and trust God in the process because there's a beautiful testimony that's going to come out on the other end.
Okay, so you hit my hallelujah moment right when you said if God had told you what he was going to do. I said, if God had told me, I would have been like, nah,
No
I ain't
thanks.
doing it. It's like, that's, I said, he was like, why doesn't God just tell me his plan? I said, because we told you his plan, you'd be like, I ain't doing it. You know,
Not
so
today.
listen, I'm so excited. Listen, sit tight because I do want to talk a little bit more about your book and what moved you to write it, and then to talk more about what your day-to-day work is in terms of what you do. I'm particularly fascinated by this idea that leaders need training and support too. And I'm sure you work with leaders. Oh. This is Alfred Edmond Jr. We're here with Shemekka Ebony with Be Lifted Up Radio, your guide to living an abundant life. Sit tight. We will be right back. Listen, this is Be Lifted Up Radio, your guide to living an abundant life. And you can tell how excited I am because we're talking with Shemekka Ebony. And listen, Shemekka, I'm glad you mentioned your book because I want you to talk some more about it and what inspired you to write it. So and also listen, everybody on this show knows if we bring on a guest and they have a book and they talk about the book, that is now your reading assignment. But I'm going to say it right out. She's going to tell you about this book, order the book, and read it because we never have a guest on the show who doesn't have a book that's worth reading. So that said, I set you up. Let's talk about the book, what it's about, and why you wrote it.
Thank you so much. So when we were living in the church, I began a workaround. I'm a poet. I write devotionals. So it was something that I already had as practice. And God just really gave me inspiration one day to take my journal, things that I was navigating while living in the church, to create something that people can be inspired and motivated by. And when I wrote While I'm Getting Naked here in my shorts, it really was about how important it is for us to peel back the layers, not what someone wants us to be, not what we think we're supposed to be, not what someone has tried to figure out your life for you and tell you you need to be, but really getting naked with ourselves in a way that makes us vulnerable to get rid of the things we don't like about ourselves, to make room for the things that God has called us to be. And in doing that, we have to peel back and remember who we are, call back into our memory who God has ordained for us to be and what we're called to do. And While I'm Getting Naked was that clarion call for others too to be inspired. It was my naked journey that I chose to be vulnerable and expose what it looked like for me, but I wrote it in a reflective journal style so that it's like it shows you from theory to practice how you can do it too. I use scriptures that you can actually be able to reference to go have that deeper dive with it. But for me, it was really about, I broke the book up in three components. So the first component is I'm coming out. And that's really, I'm getting naked, I'm stripping back the layers, I want to be free. And then the second act is naked and not ashamed. And that's sitting with the process of your nakedness, knowing that some things that you believed in may not have been correct, some things that you were doing may not have been in full alignment with what God has called you to do. But that naked and not ashamed part is God's a way of building us back up and strengthening us. And then the third part is acts. And it's like, what do you do after you get naked? You don't just stay there. It is an activation and empowerment to really energize you getting to what God has called you to do and what it looks like to get in the practice of being naked and not ashamed and walking this thing out with lived experience. And so this reflective journal gave an opportunity for us to be able to maximize what that looks like from theory to practice. And I always encourage people, if you are in a relationship, if you have a partner, you have a good girlfriends group, read this book together, because it is nothing like going and being inspired and growing and God giving you some enlightenment, and then the person you're walking with didn't get it, and then you're not being able to connect and grow together. So this is a reflective journal that can really build up your relationship as an individual in pursuit of what your servant leadership journey would look like, as well as being able to use something to renew and revive the communication between a partner that you may be walking with as well. And you can find all that and more information at shemekka.com.
Listen, that is so important. And again, we can end up doing a whole nother show. I used to be a partner in a relationship education business that covered, it was far more, less faith-based, it was more secular. But one of the key principles, and it was something I had to learn to do in my own life, I've been married multiple times, and I have a blended family, I have children from 2 different families. It was the degree to which, and not only because of that, there were other things in terms, like you said, your life doesn't go the way you planned it, and then you're like, well, what was I thinking? And I talk to people a lot of times about, there was a time when you were born when you knew exactly who you were. Like when God put you here in your own mind, you knew exactly who you were, even if you were a baby and you couldn't necessarily communicate that to other people. But almost immediately once you're born, you're being told, you're a Black person, you should be this. You're from this kind of family,
Right.
from this kind of neighborhood. And by the time you are, in my opinion, by the time you're about to go to school, many of the thoughts about who you are were thoughts planted in you by the world around you. And then there's the real you somewhere in there. And a big part of maturation, and whether it happens, whatever stage of adulthood, is learning to separate everybody else's voice from your own voice and from God's voice. And it doesn't mean the other voices don't matter. You just need to know which one is God's, which one is yours, and which ones are the other ones. And so the way you describe it in terms of your book, I think it's going to be just very, very powerful. I'm sure it's blessing people every single day, because until you can really hear God's voice and your own voice, you often don't know what you're doing or why you're doing it. You're like, why did I do that? Like, why did I marry this person? Like, why did I do that? Why am I repeating this relationship choice over and over again? Why can't I manage my budget right? Why can't, and then peeling back, okay, what are the things that you believe? Because the beliefs is what drives the emotions, and the emotions is what drive the choices. And we keep trying to change the fruit, like a different kind of fruit is going to grow on the tree, when we really know we got to get to the root. What am I growing here that's producing this fruit? But listen, again, this happens to me with every guest, because Gwen always brings great guests on the show, and I can think of a billion things to talk about. But I also want to talk about this idea that your work, whether it's executive coaching, team building, leadership development, conflict resolution, dives really deeply into something that I'm passionate about, and that's that leaders need leaders, leaders need training, leaders need development, leaders need ministry. And whether they're leaders inside the church, or maybe more importantly, outside the church, where poor leaders do a lot of damage to a lot of people. Talk to me about what you bring to the table in terms of your work, working with leaders, and so they can be effective, not only achieving whatever the goals of the organization is, but more importantly, at least as a person of faith, that they don't do damage. They don't speak and build death into people as opposed to life into people.
I love this. And the best characterization I can bring to this, for example, is the challenge of leading while bleeding. And when we think about this through the lens of the impact.
Say that again, because, oh Lord.
Yes, it's real.
Oh my,
when we are facing,
while bleeding.
Yes, leading while bleeding. And from theory to practice, what that ends up looking like is a leader that has not had a safe space or an outlet to really get the revelation out of what his or her own challenges are. If they come out too prematurely dealing or addressing with what their struggle or challenge may be, then they find themselves pouring out not the revelation of the journey, but the hardships and the pain of doing it. And not only that, you'll find yourself, especially characterization of leading while bleeding is when you're telling someone about your struggle, and then you got to go back and rescue them because they took it a little too hard, and now they're overwhelmed and don't know. Now you got to help them cry through it. You thought you were coming there to pour out your heart, even in the place of indecision, and you were bleeding through it with someone that didn't have the capacity to hold what you had need to be contained while you were still trying to work through your leadership journey. In this space as a leadership coach, understanding servant leadership, understanding the challenging impacts of hurting people while you're healing. I mean, someone in pain is going to hurt because they're more focused on the fact that they're in pain, not that they're trying not to hurt you. And if
Right.
you do not have that safe space to kind of have that sounding board and to have that voice of wisdom and have the counsel of the godly, which can come in the form of leadership coaching, you will find yourself on repeat of trying to heal and bring someone else out while you're also broken. And sometimes that can get the message a little bit more tainted rather than allowing it to go through that rinse cycle one more time so that you're not harming people that you're trying to help along the way.
Listen, Shemekka. Oh man, you got me so full. Listen, everybody. Sit tight. Listen to Be Lifted Up Radio. I'm with Shemekka Ebony. We will be right back. Welcome back to Be Lifted Up Radio. I'm your host, Alfred Edmond Jr. You see how excited I am because this woman is all up in my Kool-Aid, all up in my business, which she said, leading while bleeding. Listen, as someone, again, I'm older than you. I'm a baby boomer. And, I tell people that the challenge of leadership is not always the leading part. It's not, usually you're well prepared, you're experienced, you're educated, people trust you, you have some accomplishments. I said the challenge of leadership is when I tell people when you're going through a divorce or when one of your kids are in a crisis or when you have a health, you don't get to land the plane as the leader. Okay, y'all, I'm gonna land the plane, go take care of this and come back. No, people still have the same needs, the same expectations, the organization, whether it's the organization, individuals. And like you said, on the one hand, you got to show up like, yeah, I got this. And on the other hand, you're about to drive your car back home and face something that, and often not only can you not share it with anyone, if you shared it, as you said, you'd be doing a disservice to the people that are looking to you for confident leadership. So this whole idea of leading while bleeding, you just hit me right in the gut because I tell people leaders don't get to land the plane. Leaders don't get to pause the battle. Leaders don't get to say, can I get a timeout while I navigate the fact that my partner is about to go to jail? We don't get to do that. And creating safe spaces to navigate that while still flying the plane and still leading the troops, it's just such a powerful concept that's going to bless so many people when they hear this show. I mean, again, and I don't want to lose the opportunity for you to talk about just all the things that you do, the Black Girl Magic Market. I Am Brilliant. I can go through all of them. The Crown Campaign. You do so much. So
it's God. It's God.
Oh, yes.
So often, especially as small business owners, the way the system operates is to tell you you can only focus on one thing. But I know a God that gave a word through the scripture that talks about that some of us have many talents. And there's something we're supposed to be activated to do with them. And so, with God's grace and power, I'm able to show up and hold court in various I call them siloed communities. So, a Black Girl Magic Market, though it is amplifying the work around Black women entrepreneurs, the bigger vision of it is that we're facing equity, economic equity and empowerment from theory to practice and navigating pathways on how we can grow in this capacity and how we can be better small business owners, how we can get access to the resources and funding. When you think through the lens of the work of the Crown Campaign, that is really about amplifying ways of equity and ending racial discrimination in the form of hair discrimination that we were able to create and produce policy behind. A lot of my research also amplifies how we can take lived experience expertise not having to have degrees, but what you survived, what God allowed you to survive, whether it was health, whether it was financial, whether it was a relationship, you came out on the other end. And your lived experience expertise should be valued just as much as someone that went and got a Harvard degree. Come on now. If God
True.
brought you through it, there's a manifestation of what's possible living inside you that other people need to see a reflection of. And so my life began to be dedicated with that. I'm grateful that I get to do the work of I Am Brilliant, which is about brilliance being a luminous. I do that with my husband, who was featured in Black Enterprise when he was 16, just to shout out your work and your power and your impact of giving him a chance back in 98 helps amplify the work that we're doing this many years later. Michael Stewart
Wait, wait.
Isaacs is
What's your
his
husband's name?
name.
What's your husband's
Yes,
name?
he was Michael Stewart when he was in high school. He had a clothing brand called Mosaic here out of North Carolina,
I
and he was
remember
featured.
him.
That's it.
Wow. Oh, shoot. Please give him my best. Now I have to circle back to him. Wow.
Yes.
Mm-mm-mm.
So we've been able to take the power and that open door and the access and create those avenues to remind people, because people, it's already in you. God has already given you that gift. And so the work of I Am Brilliant, which you can find more about at iambrilliant.org, has really been centered around amplifying this message. What has God called you to do, and how can we help get your message out to others? And so we've dedicated our life, our ministry, our businesses to be able to amplify what's possible for others, as well as give a pathway for those to be able to come out on the other side of going through, knowing that we're a second chance marriage. And I know you mentioned your previous marriage earlier. One of the powerful things that I want to lift up about that is that we look at our prior marriages as they were substitute teachers. Sometimes the substitute teachers come in your life to teach you what you need, but they're not going to sugarcoat and make things life and wonderful for you, but they're going to give you what you need. And those injections of what we need are God's reminders to let you know that if we keep pushing, if we keep walking, and we keep faithful to what he's called us to do, then we get those bonuses and blessings of surviving the storm. And he's definitely been a bonus and a blessing on the other side of my storm, to be able to walk in ministry together with him, be
Yes.
in business together. And we have our podcast that we do together called Sunday Stacks, where we focus on family, community, and company.
Says Sunday Stacks.
Sunday Stacks, yes.
All right, I love it. I love it. Listen, something you said earlier at the top of the show that it comes back to me when we talk about all the things that you're able to do, because God gifted you with many things. Because I'm one of those people, like, people say, how can you do all of this stuff? You host multiple shows. I'm a bodybuilder. That's my sport. You do bodybuilding. You do this. You do that. How do you find time? And I tell people about you, because you said earlier about being spared from getting caught up in distractions because you were basically pulled out of the world, if you will.
Yes.
And I tell people, I say, I get to do everything I want to do by being able to say no to things that would be nice to do. Like, the distraction is not the things you don't want to do. The distraction are the things that would be nice to do, but if you did it, you wouldn't really be able to do the things you really need to do. And I'll give you a quick example. It's not that I don't watch television, but a lot of the biggest hit shows I have not seen. Because I'm not going to commit 3 hours a night, 5 days a week to any kind of programming. So there'll be like one show in a given, say, 4-year period where I can say, yeah, I saw every episode. Like, I was a big fan of The Closer. Oh, I've seen every episode of The Closer. But there's 10 other good shows that I have never seen the episode. I only know about it because of social media. I've never watched. You ain't never watched such and such. I'm like, I'm not given that kind of time. So when people say, how do leaders who do a lot get a lot done? I say, God says you don't need to have everything. Don't get caught up in the nice to dos and not be able to do what you have to do, or what I'm being calling you to do. And it doesn't mean you're demonizing watching TV or you're demonizing. But if you recognize your calling, you say, you know what? There's going to be some nice things that I'm not going to get to do, and that's okay. I said, we don't need to get caught up in the things that we shouldn't be doing. It's the things that are nice to do, but it's going to distract us from our calling. You know, the enemy tempts us with pleasant things.
Right.
Like,
things of life.
You know, he didn't tell Eve, yeah, screw God. Tell God. No, he's like, oh, this apple can't be that bad. Well, you know, what harm can it do? Yeah. And I said, I've learned really well to be able to say, it probably is not going to do any harm, but I'm not about that. I'm not about that. And I sense that about you too. Listen, one more time, because I'm burning it up. tell our audience, already mentioned a couple of websites where they can get resources, where they can get your book. What's the best way for them to continue to follow Shemekka Ebony on social as well as the other websites that you mentioned?
Thank you for that. If there's any of you that see this or hear this and are interested in leadership coaching, then definitely check out ShemekkaEbony.com. We can have a discovery call. I do peer groups virtually through Forum. I have one coming up for DEI leaders to kind of help you navigate these changing times ahead. So there's peer support that I offer in a group setting as well as one-on-one. And then we have opportunities where you can get our books and other resources that we have through Shemekka.com. I call that my e-commerce digital store to amplify Black women entrepreneurs as well as other minority groups. So we have that you can definitely reach out to, and we want to hear from you. So please don't hesitate to reach out and let us know what you think, what you need, and how we can support the work that you're doing in your community too, through community leadership.
Yep, and to make sure you guys go to the right place, it's Shemekka, Shemekka. Did I get that right?
Yes.
Ebony, like Ebony and Jet, the regular Ebony, not with the I, but with the Y. ShemekkaEbony.com. Listen, Shemekka, I am so glad you made time to be a guest on this show. I know that this episode is going to bless so many people. And you blessed me. I'm like, see, I've been at BE so long, I shouldn't be surprised. People are like, yeah, my mama was in the magazine when... And so please give my best to your husband. We definitely got to connect. I gotta let our chief content officer know. We might need to do a where is he now type of piece on my man.
Absolutely, you will be glad.
Well, thank you. You're a blessing. God bless your family, and thank you for joining us on this edition of Be Lifted Up Radio. Welcome back to Be Lifted Up Radio. And we just had a powerful, powerful conversation with Shemekka Ebony, activist, author, coach, entrepreneur, so much more, mother, wife, amazing, amazing person. But she really did get to the heart of driving positive change in communities, not just as a worthwhile worldly activity, and it is worthwhile in a secular sense, but as a matter of faithful kingdom building, of having a positive impact on the world, as a way of service. Remember, serving other people is the ultimate expression of loving God. You serve people, and by serving people, you're loving God. So when you say you love God, being able to serve people is especially if you're talking about serving communities of people, is a lovely, lovely way to have a positive impact on advancing God's kingdom and doing wonderful, important ministry, especially to leaders. We talked a lot about why leaders may need ministry more because they have the fortunes and the futures of so many other people in their hands. So again, Shemekka Ebony, oh my God, powerful, powerful conversation and great, great insights into your calling, your goals, your desire to make positive impact in our communities in whatever your community is. So again, just a great show, great guest, and hopefully you've been moved to make a difference in your community. Listen, if you want to catch this episode and every episode of Be Lifted Up Radio, you can go to liftitupradio.com. You can find us as part of the Mocha Podcast Network.com. That's podcast, plural. Mocha is in like coffee, Mocha. We're on social media at Instagram, Facebook, X, at Be Lifted Up Radio. You can catch the show on YouTube. We really urge you to sign up for our YouTube channel where you'll get just a great experience. Again, at Be Lifted Up Radio, the letter B. And you can catch us on Sirius XM 141, HUR Voices, on Sundays, Tuesdays, and Thursdays at 5 p.m. Eastern every week. So listen, I'm Alfred Edmond Jr., your host. Thank you for joining us at Be Lifted Up Radio, your guide to living an abundant life. We'll see you next time.